A small town was suddenly blanketed by winter. It really was a sudden change. Just the evening before, everything was gray, bleak, frozen by the autumn rain. But overnight, the wind came, followed by thick snowflakes, and in an instant, everything shimmered and sparkled. Trees adorned themselves with lacy, snow-white shawls. Dirty puddles and lifeless flower beds hid beneath fluffy drifts of snow. Even fences, house windows, and walls were covered with a veil of snowflakes. It was beautiful, and it didn't even feel that cold. Anna was walking to work, admiring the scene unfolding before her eyes. There was no more gloom, no more despair. It seemed like the snow had absorbed all the world's sorrows, and only a new life lay ahead. Though what kind of life could it be when the cold had arrived? Her heart was filled with both joy and sadness. And around them, the times were tough, the early 1990s. Anna worked as a biology teacher in a school. Her husband, Morton, had also been a teacher until recently, teaching mathematics. But when the most challenging times began, he decided to leave the school and venture into business. Anna viewed this with skepticism. Nevertheless, Morton started trading, buying goods from some speculators and selling them at a market where he rented a small plot. Jeans, sweaters, sneakers, and it seemed to be working for him. But Anna couldn't shake the unease in her heart. Martin had gotten involved with some unsavory characters, and he had borrowed money for the goods. But what could they do? The times were so uncertain. People who were in prison yesterday were driving expensive cars today. Anna looked up at the sky with sadness, and all she saw were clouds drifting somewhere. She sighed, and Melly shook herself. Why be nervous? Let things go as they will. After all, Anna and Martin didn't have any other options. They needed the money, and they hadn't been paid their salaries at the school for 3 months already. They were just being fed promises, and you can't explain that to your daughter and son. Thinking about her children, Anna smiled and then sighed heavily. They were such good kids. Jonah was 6 years old, and Cristin was 7. Cristin would be starting school next year, and that would bring new expenses, but that wasn't the real problem. The issue was that Jonah needed surgery. He had a heart defect. The doctors had honestly told them that this operation would have been done easily before, but now they had to pay for it, and it wasn't a small sum, and they didn't have the money. Perhaps that was the main reason why Martin, a talented young teacher, had left his job at the school. He needed to earn enough for their son's surgery. Anna reached the school, tried to put on a smile, and Melly brushed off all her worries. No one should see her sadness. Everything will be fine. It has to be. In the teacher's lounge, colleagues were passionately discussing something. Anna greeted them, took off her coat, and tidied her hair in front of the mirror while eavesdropping on the teacher's conversation. "Is that Jordan guy?" exclaimed Margot, the senior literature teacher at the school. "A troublemaker, no doubt. I remember he was in 7th grade when he intentionally broke the window in my classroom. All because I gave him a D for plagiarizing an essay. Quite audacious. He copied the preface from the textbook. He thought I wouldn't notice, and later he set the school magazine on fire in the restroom." Margot, director of the school, Stephanie, interrupted her colleagues, reminiscing with a disapproving tone. "What's done is done. It's time to move on. Jordan is now a respected man, a businessman. He came all the way from the capital to our town. I think this respected man has spent some time in prison a few times already, including for robbery," chimed in the gym teacher, Matthew. "So what?" Stephanie grew concerned. "That's none of our business. Everyone can make mistakes. Moreover, Jordan is now putting forth his candidacy for a high position, and he remembered his alma mater and is willing to help us without any compensation." "All right," Margot sighed. "Tomorrow, we have a meeting with Jordan, and we need to prepare." "Anna, you're in charge of Class 8B, right?" "Yes, I'm their homeroom teacher," Anna replied, feeling a bit flustered. "Perfect. They're the most artistic students in the school. Today, prepare a small event to welcome our esteemed guest." "That all sounds wonderful," Anna shrugged, "but I'm not entirely sure who we're celebrating." "Jordan Ross. He's a former student of ours. He offered financial assistance for renovating the gymnasium. Tomorrow, we'll welcome him. Your students will recite a couple of poems about the wonderful school years, sing a song or two, and then I'll discuss all the details with Jordan in person," Director Stephanie quickly instructed Anna. Anna simply nodded in response. Well, Anna didn't know about Jordan. She had only been working at the school for a short time, and what happened in the past wasn't her concern. Times were different now. On that day, Anna stayed at school until late in the evening. First, there were lessons, then a rehearsal with the kids for an unexpected event, and later an impromptu teachers' meeting, a kind of briefing before the arrival of the esteemed guest. Everyone dispersed as dusk settled in. Fortunately, Martin got off work early that day and was able to pick up the children from daycare, but Anna was still in a rush to get home. After all, she needed to prepare dinner. However, when she entered the hallway, she was greeted by the aroma of something delicious. "Hello, dear." Martin peeked out from the kitchen. "Let's wash up and get to the table. I've fried some pork." "Oh, where did you get it?" Anna asked in surprise. "I made a barter deal," Martin explained with a laugh. "There was this guy from the village at the market who came to me while I was shopping for jeans for our son. He had some meat left from the market too, so I agreed, why not? Sometimes we deserve a treat." "Yes, of course," Anna sighed. "But we need the money more. You remember about Jonah's surgery, and pork is heavy meat for him." "Anna, relax." Martin embraced her and kissed her cheek. "I promise, by spring, I'll save up enough for our son's surgery, and a little piece of meat won't hurt him. Besides, he may not even eat it." Anna nodded in response. While Anna and Martin were talking in the hallway, the children were already sitting obediently at the kitchen table. It seemed that the aromas of the upcoming dinner had also captivated them. And indeed, they all enjoyed their dinner immensely. Later, as they prepared for bed, Anna heard Cristin humming a song. "Did you learn the song at daycare?" Annie asked with a smile. "Nair, we're doing a skit for New Year," Cristin replied while putting on her pajamas. "I'm ready to dive into the ocean with a leap. I'm ready to climb a volcano without fear. I'm not afraid of any beast, but I'm afraid of being a sister. And it's time to openly say, what is a younger brother? It's worse than a bombshell." "What a funny song." Anna smiled again. "But it's definitely not about you and Jonah." "Jonah is the best," Cristin confirmed. "And the song is cheerful." "Cheerful," Jonah chimed in from under his blanket. "Sing it again." And Cristin started singing, with Jonah echoing her. Anna left the children to their singing. Soon, they quieted down and fell asleep, while Anna and Martin sat in the kitchen, calculating how much more they needed to save for Jonah's surgery. By spring, everything should work out. The next morning, the family went about their usual routines. The children went to daycare, and the adults headed to work. After the 5th lesson, everyone prepared for the meeting with the benefactor, Jordan, who had promised to renovate the gym. The principal was the most anxious. The teaching staff was divided. Some were also excited about the upcoming visit of the esteemed guest, while others remained calm, even indifferent. But the children sincerely looked forward to the upcoming event, especially the high school students, whose last class had been canceled. Soon, a black SUV arrived at the school, and from it emerged a tall man in his mid-30s. This was Jordan himself. Stephanie welcomed Jordan on the school porch, and then there was the event where Anna's students performed brilliantly. Afterward, in the teacher's lounge, the principal introduced the educators to the distinguished guest. Jordan recognized some of them, like Margot. They exchanged dry greetings, but Jordan cast a predatory glance at Anna. "What charming teachers we have at our school now." He grinned broadly at the young woman, and it didn't say anything in response, just nodded. And then Stephanie led Jordan into her office for a confidential discussion about the gym renovation. Anna returned to her classroom and began checking notebooks as time allowed. In just a couple of hours, she would be able to pick up her son and daughter from daycare. Unexpectedly, the school technician entered her classroom and said she was urgently needed at the phone. "They're calling from the daycare center," she explained. Anna, abandoning everything, rushed to the teacher's room. What she heard on the phone horrified her. After lunch, Jonah suddenly became unwell, struggling to breathe, and an ambulance had rushed him to the hospital. In her anxiety, she dashed out of the school, hastily buttoning up her coat. Near the school gates, she literally bumped into Jordan, who was smoking and contemplatively studying the school building, apparently reminiscing about the past. "Oh, I'm sorry." Anna blushed and tried to go around the man. "And where are you hurrying to?" He smiled. "To my son. He was taken to the hospital." Anna confessed, her eyes welling up. "Goodness," Jordan exclaimed. "How old is he?" "He's 6. Anna sobbed. "Well, let me give you a ride." Jordan offered. Anna, a bit bewildered, eventually agreed. It was uncertain how long they would have to wait for the only bus that served their neighborhood, and in the car, without fully understanding why, Anna told Jordan the story of her son, how they had received the diagnosis 2 years ago, about the surgery. Yes, it all comes down to money now. Jordan shook his head. I feel for your kid, but for some reason, I'm sure you'll make it. I hope so too. Don't dwell on the negative. Jordan tried to console her, and strangely, in those moments, he didn't seem like a criminal or a tough guy to Anna. He seemed like a regular person, and his past didn't matter. At the hospital, Jordan asked for Anna's home phone number. She didn't even bother asking why. She felt like she was doing the right thing, and had a hunch that Jordan might want to help. Maybe, for him, the amount needed for Jonah's surgery was just pocket change. From the waiting area, they called Anna into the ward. She hurriedly put on a gown and rushed up the stairs. In the stairwell, she encountered the familiar doctor who had examined Jonah before. Alex, what's happening with Jonah? Anna rushed towards him. Have you examined him? I have, and my colleague. The doctor sighed. We've relieved the choking episode, and now the boy is asleep. But the situation is getting serious. We need to perform the surgery as soon as possible. But why? What caused this? Was it the pork? Anna gasped. Jonah had a hearty dinner yesterday evening. I don't think it's related to that. The doctor shook his head. It's simply that the boy is growing, and his heart is struggling to cope with the strain. The surgery needs to be done within a month. Start looking for the funds. The doctor went into the ward, leaving Anna utterly drained as she slumped against the wall near the staircase. Where can we find the remaining amount? It's only November, and my husband and I plan to save up until April or May. In the evening, Anna and her husband were racking their brains, trying to figure out where to find the money. What if we ask our school benefactor? Anna suddenly remembered and told Martin about Jordan. I don't think that's a good idea. Martin hesitated. People like that don't do things for free. Well, then you do it. Anna shouted suddenly. You're a man. I'm sorry. Anna realized her outburst and hugged her husband. We'll manage. We'll come up with something. Martin remained silent, just holding his wife tightly. Later, as he tucked Cristin into bed, Anna couldn't hold back her tears. Whenever she thought about her son, her heart ached. How was he doing? Her little one, her daughter, seeing her mother's state, stayed quiet, clearly frightened. She had learned about her brother's condition, and when Anna, kissing her goodnight, was about to leave, she whispered softly, Mom, will Jonah die? No, sweetie. Anna rushed to her daughter, barely holding back tears. No, we'll cure him. We will definitely cure him. Is his heart hurting more? The innocent girl asked. Yes. And can't my heart help him? Anna bit her lip to hold back the tears. What are you saying? That's your heart. How can you be without it? But how will I be without my little brother? My dear, my precious one, don't worry. Jonah will get better. He'll come back to us. Anna whispered soothing words to her daughter until she fell asleep. She stumbled out of the children's room on weak legs. If Jordan calls, I'll ask him directly for help, she firmly told her husband. Martin simply closed his eyes and then nodded in agreement. Maybe this Jordan was not such a bad person after all. The next day at school, everything felt like a blur to Anna. Her colleagues were still discussing the guest's visit and his promises, but she was lost in her thoughts, waiting for Jordan to visit the director. However, he never showed up in the evening, probably caught up with other matters. But when Anna finally came home, the phone in the hallway rang. She rushed to answer it, and it was Jordan. Anna, hello, I'm calling to check on your little one. Jordan inquired first, and Anna, in tears, shared everything with him. Jordan, can you lend us the remaining amount with my husband? Anna finally dared to ask. We'll pay you back by spring. For you and your husband, no. Jordan thought for a moment and replied, but for you personally, yes. I don't understand. What's the difference? Anna muttered. Simply put, you will owe me personally. All right, I agree. Anna responded without fully grasping the implications. But we need the money urgently. Where should I bring it? Jordan inquired in a businesslike manner. Anna provided her address. Soon, the familiar black Jeep pulled up near her house. Anxious, Anna stood by the entrance. Shall we go up to the apartment? She asked. No, let's stay in the car, Jordan replied. He opened the car door, inviting Anna inside, and handed her an envelope. When she peeked inside, she became flustered. "There's more here than we need. We already have part of the sum," she stammered. "Take it all. They'll definitely need it," Jordan replied. "Thank you." Anna nodded gratefully. "Please don't doubt us. We'll repay everything." "I have no doubts," Jordan said with an unpleasant grin. "People always repay their debts to me." For some reason, Anna felt a shiver down her spine when she heard that phrase, but she tried not to dwell on it. Yes, Jordan was a strange character, but the main thing was that he had helped. Time would show what to do next. The crucial thing was that Jonah could now be saved. She thanked him once again and got out of the car. At that moment, Martin was parking by the entrance. Anna waited for her husband, in the Jeep, as if watchful eyes were fixed on her from inside. Didn't rush to leave. "Who was that?" Martin asked on the way. He had seen Anna getting out of the Jeep. "Martin, that was Jordan," Anna joyfully announced. "He gave us the money. Now we definitely have enough for the surgery, medications, and accommodation in the capital while Jonah is in the hospital." Martin didn't say anything, just sighed. These funds were indeed a lifesaver for his son. He hadn't managed to find the full amount himself today. On the way home, Martin felt a mix of emotions. It was like he should be happy, but there was a lingering unease. Then the worry gradually faded away as preparations to transport Jonah to the hospital began. Anna and Martin were constantly at their son's side in the hospital. And finally, everything was ready. Taking leave in the middle of the school year, despite the director's disapproval, Anna and her son left for Washington for treatment. Martin and Cristin stayed behind, waiting for them. They admitted the boy to the hospital, and Anna rented a room nearby. Only then did she realize that Jordan had been right to give her more money than she asked for. During their time in the capital, she had nearly depleted their resources on her son's medication, rent, and groceries. Anna and Jonah spent nearly 3 months in the hospital. They returned to their hometown only at the end of February. Now the little one was completely healthy. Cristin, who had missed her brother and mother terribly, stayed glued to them. "You're my best little brother," the girl exclaimed, hugging her brother. "I love you so much." "I love you too, and Mom and Dad," the boy confessed. The children laughed and embraced. In those moments, Anna and Martin silently cherished their children. How wonderful it was that all the trials were in the past. Little did they know that new challenges in their lives were just beginning. Anna had to quit her job for good. Jonah was advised against any physical exertion after the operation until he fully recovered. Martin reassured his wife that he could handle all the financial difficulties. His trade business was slowly but surely expanding. He had even purchased a small container for his trading and had traveled to Turkey a couple of times to procure goods. "Anna, there will come a time when we won't need anything," he would say, smiling. Anna would nod in agreement. But one thought troubled her. They hadn't yet repaid their debt to Jordan. Martin reassured her, saying he had already set aside a portion. They were planning to pay it all back by the summer. After all, Jordan hadn't made any demands. He had left, but he was supposed to return to their town by the end of the school year, precisely when the gym renovation was scheduled. Anna learned about this from her former colleagues. By that time, Anna and Martin intended to gather the full amount Jordan had provided for Jonah's treatment. Despite the challenging times, they had enough food and clothing, and they managed to get by. However, Anna had no intention of relying solely on her husband. In the upcoming school year, she planned to return to work. At least, that was the agreement she had with the school's director, Stephanie. Then spring arrived, followed by summer. One day, Anna received a call from the school, asking her to come in. She assumed it was about her return to work, so she grabbed her documents and left her son with a neighbor before rushing to the school. As she approached the school gates, she spotted a familiar Jeep. Her heart skipped a beat for some reason, but she tried to dismiss the feeling. She confidently approached the vehicle, and the rear door opened, revealing Jordan. "Good day, Anna. I've been waiting for you," Jordan smiled. "Hop in the car. We have something to discuss." "Hello, Jordan." Anna nodded. "If it won't take too long. I have a meeting at the school. I asked the principal to call you," Jordan explained. "You?" Anna was surprised and then quickly added, "Oh, yes. You don't think I forgot about the debt, do you? My husband and I have almost gathered the entire amount." "With your husband?" Jordan smirked. "Just get in." Anna timidly got into the car. Jordan was sitting in the back seat, sprawled comfortably and openly observing Anna. He stared at her, and the driver watched in the rearview mirror. Anna shivered from her premonitions. "Jordan, thank you so much," she began the conversation. "If it weren't for you, I don't know how it would have all ended." "How's your son?" Jordan inquired. "He's doing wonderfully. He's completely healthy now." "I'm glad." "Yes, that's true. About the debt," Anna hurried to explain. "We've saved up almost the entire amount, with just a little left. Let me give you what we have now, and the rest in a month or two." "All right," Jordan nodded. "Are you aware that the amount has changed?" "What does that mean?" Anna was taken aback. "I'm primarily a businessman, and money needs to work. So the amount has doubled by now, with interest. But you didn't say anything about it back then." Anna whispered in horror. "We definitely don't have that kind of money now, and I don't know when we'll be able to gather it, but don't worry, we will. I'll find a job, and Martin will save up." "You chose the wrong guy, sweetheart. Negotiate with me," Jordan said. "What do you mean, negotiate?" Anna blushed. "Well, you understand it all. That is sacred. You'll repay it. Besides, I need to invest a bit in philanthropy here, as they'll start renovating the gym any day now. As for the interest, you'll work it off," Jordan said. "How?" Annie asked barely audibly. "Good Lord, are you really so naive?" Jordan laughed, then almost snorted with anticipation. "You'll work it off with your body. If I like it, I'll forgive the remaining debt. Here, give me a call." He handed her his business card. "How can you even suggest such a thing?" Annie exclaimed and jumped out of the car. "We will repay everything, both the debt and the interest." "Well, if you are so bold." Jordan peered out of the car and gave Anna a predatory look. "Keep in mind, I'll give you 2 days. Then you must repay everything, the debt and the interest. If you don't, you'll regret it." He slammed the car door, the engine roared to life, and the car sped away. Anna stood on the sidewalk, bewildered. She looked at the business card, intending to toss it away, but for some reason, she absent-mindedly put it in her purse. Stephanie emerged from the school gate. She spotted her former colleague and approached. "Are you here already?" she asked cheerfully. "And Jordan, he asked me to arrange a meeting for you." "Oh, Anna, you've got him all flustered. I think he's lost his mind because of you." "What did he lose?" Anna replied with an echo, lost in thought. "His mind." Stephanie laughed. "You dear, should not be so dismissive. I understand, you're a role model as a teacher and all that, but times have changed. You need to understand that. And when a respected person shows interest, you shouldn't reject it." "Stephanie, will you take me back to work?" Anna asked, ignoring the director's words. "I will," Stephanie nodded. "There's a catch, though. Jordan asked me to delay your reemployment a bit." "Jordan?" Anna smirked. "Who is he, anyway? Why are you listening to some thug?" "He's not a thug." Stephanie raised her head. "He's a businessman, and our sponsor. People like him are not to be trifled with. In any case, sort out your issues with Jordan, and then come back to work." With that, Stephanie continued on her way, leaving Anna stunned and confused at the school gates. In the evening, she told her husband everything. Martin listened, growing darker and more silent as she spoke. Anna fell silent too. "So," Martin finally said, "don't you ever dare to communicate with him again. I will handle this problem now." "Martin, but how? Where will you get that much money?" "I thought maybe we should sell the apartment." "And where will we live?" Martin replied, thinking of something else. "I have one option. I'll try to resolve it tomorrow." "Are you going to those gangsters again?" "Not gangsters, but my creditors. Moreover, John is a reasonable guy. He'll understand and help," Martin said confidently. The next day, Martin went straight to the local oligarch, John. Yes, Martin already owed him money, but he hoped John would understand. John listened, remained silent for a moment, and then shook his head. "It's nothing personal, Martin," John said. "But you already owe me quite a bit." "I'll pay it all back," Martin insisted. "Yes, I know you will," John said. "You're an honest man, and you work well, but that's not the issue. Some people came to me and told me not to give you a single cent more, or there will be consequences. These are very serious individuals, and I won't deal with them." "Are these Jordan's people?" Martin guessed. John didn't answer, only nodded in response. Martin left empty-handed. Inside, a storm raged in the man's soul. No, he understood that debts needed to be repaid, and he was willing to pay them. But could they really apply this kind of pressure? Martin understood the true reason behind Jordan's behavior. He wanted to take his wife as another plaything, and just thinking about it filled Martin with rage. He wouldn't let anyone mistreat his woman. He would find a way out, even if he had to talk to Jordan man to man. After gathering information from reliable sources about where Jordan lived, a rented mansion on the outskirts of the city, Martin headed there. Explaining to the gatekeeper who he wanted to see, Martin patiently waited. Many phrases swirled in his head. Once he wanted to hurl at Jordan, but he understood that he needed to be careful. He needed to negotiate, not argue. The gate swung open, and the guard peered out. "Follow me," he said curtly, and Martin obediently followed him. Seated in a wicker chair outside the house was a man about Martin's age. Though Martin had only caught a brief glimpse of him in the entrance of the building, he recognized him immediately. Yes, it was that very Jordan. And pleasant character, Martin thought right away. But they had to negotiate. "Did you come to ask for your wife?" Jordan asked with a smirk, sipping from a tiny coffee cup. "I came to settle the debt," Martin replied. "What's there to settle? I told your Anna everything. Nothing complicated. Trust me, she might even like it," Jordan said. After those words, Martin flared up, clenched his fists, barely restraining himself from lunging at Jordan. "That's disgusting," he muttered quietly. "That sum isn't significant for you. Don't you count my money." Jordan smirked again. "I'll give you the money. Just give me some time. And don't touch my wife," Martin replied, trying to appear calm. "But I haven't touched her yet," Jordan laughed out loud. "Though I wouldn't mind trying. She seems like quite a hot item. Don't be stingy. Share. It won't hurt her, and we'll all enjoy it," he added. Hearing this, Martin rocked as if struck and lost control of himself. "You scum," he yelled and lunged at Jordan with his fists. But right away, two of Jordan's guards intervened, and a third one, who had been by the gate, joined them. They wrestled Martin to the ground and began systematically beating him, using all their strength, while Jordan watched and sipped his coffee. "All right, that's enough," he said at some point. "He'll die here. Take him away and dump him." Martin, barely alive, was thrown into the trunk of the same jeep, taken far from the estate, and left in some park. He was discovered by passers-by, who called an ambulance. They took him to the hospital. Thankfully, they found his driver's license in his pocket, which allowed the police to identify him. They called Anna, but on that evening, she couldn't find a place to stay. Martin was supposed to have come home by then, but he was still missing. Their daughter and son had quietly gone to their rooms after dinner, understanding that it was better not to disturb their mother right now. They sat in their room, drying, while Anna stood by the window, waiting. The phone call came unexpectedly, and it felt like a rush of noise in Anna's head. She rushed to the phone, and what she heard left her stunned. Martin was in the hospital, in critical condition. Anna sank to the floor, unable to gather her strength. She needed to go to the hospital, find out everything. But her legs wouldn't obey. "Mommy, are you feeling sick?" Cristin's voice emerged from the children's room. "Maybe we can give you a pill. Or some water," Jonah added from behind her. "Yes, some water. Sweetie, bring me a glass," Anna barely managed to say. Her little son ran to the kitchen, and as he sipped from the glass, Anna slowly began to regain her composure. Why had she fallen apart like that? The main thing was that Martin was alive. She got up and hugged her children. "My dears, can you stay alone?" she asked. "Of course," Cristin nodded. "We're already big kids." "That's great. I'll be back soon. You go to bed." "Mom," Jonah called from the doorway. "Where's Dad?" "He's running late. You go to sleep," Anna replied. It was wrong to tell the children about the tragedy. They were still so young. In the hospital, Anna awaited another blow. Yes, Martin was alive, but his condition was not just serious, it was critical. They had performed surgery, but it hadn't helped much. Anna listened to the doctor and realized that she was losing Martin. "Can I see him?" she pleaded. "Actually, you're not allowed," the doctor sighed. "He's in the intensive care unit." Then he looked at the pale woman, sighed again, and said, "All right, follow me." Martin lay there, completely bandaged up, with tubes and wires all around. Anna's heart ached with pain. "My dear, my love," she whispered, kneeling beside the bed. "Just hold on, I'm with you. I'm right here. We'll get through this together," she cried. prayed for a miracle, her heart torn into pieces. If only she could do something. But what? The doctor tapped her on the shoulder and said, "It's time." Stumbling, she left the ICU, went downstairs to the waiting room. Anna couldn't remember how long she sat there until she suddenly saw the doctor from the ICU nearby. "What?" she uttered in fear. "I'm sorry," the doctor replied softly. "Your husband has passed away." Anna screamed, loudly and fearfully. A nurse rushed to get a sedative, and an orderly hugged her, whispering comforting words. But how could she calm down when her world had crumbled? Anna returned home in the early morning, driven by the same doctor. "Stay strong," he said as they parted ways. "You have children to take care of now, and you need to be doubly strong." Doubly strong, Anna repeated. The word echoed inside her, as if in emptiness. The kids were sleeping, huddled together on one bed. Anna froze in the doorway, looking at her little ones. How could she tell them that their father was no more? It was terrifying. Anna went to the kitchen and tiredly sat on a stool. She couldn't believe that Martin would never walk back into their apartment, smile, hug them, or brew his delicious herbal tea, a skill he possessed alone. But what had happened? Anna was lost in speculation. Who had done this to her husband? The police had promised to investigate and find the culprits. But would they? The times were turbulent. Anna had forgotten about past troubles. Grief had taken over. Eventually, she found the strength within herself to tell the children that their father was gone. Cristin and Jonah cried. Anna cried too. Ahead lay uncertainty. Then there were the funerals. Anna began to regain her composure a little, and now she was tormented by one question. When will they find those responsible for Martin's death? One day in early August, she went to the police station to find out everything. The investigator talked at length about the surge in crime and the challenges they faced. Anna patiently awaited an answer to her question. "I don't know what to tell you," the investigator finally admitted. "We never found any witnesses to the crime. His car is also missing. It was probably stolen. I think it's been stripped down for pots a long time ago," the investigator added. "Don't worry, we're still searching. If we find anything, we'll let you know." Anna realized she wouldn't get any answers here. She left the station, sat on a bench, and wept. How could she go on from here? It was only now that she remembered Martin's place in the market, his goods. She had to do something about it. Anna went to the market, and to her surprise, Martin's container was bustling with lively trading. The seller was someone Anna didn't know. He only shrugged and brushed her off when she asked questions. Anna remembered her husband's acquaintance, Kyle, who worked nearby. When Kyle saw Anna, he lowered his gaze, as if to say, all questions should be directed to the market owner, and that owner was John. Soon, Anna found him in one of the administrative buildings at the market. "Why did you come?" John asked in surprise. "Martin owed me so much that all his merchandise is just a drop in the bucket." "Yes, I took it for myself, but it doesn't cover his debts. It's good that you came on your own. Let's settle this." "Settle what?" Anna asked quietly. "What to do about the main debt? Who will repay it to me? Besides you, there's no one," John replied. "How much?" Anna whispered. John named the sum. When Anna heard it, everything went dark before her eyes. "I have nothing," she replied hopelessly. "You have an apartment. Sell it, and we'll consider it settled," John said. "And what about my children? Will we be left homeless?" "Sorry, but that's not my problem," John replied. "I'm giving you a month to resolve all your issues." "And then what?" "And then no excuses. That's it. I have business to attend to." John pointed to the door. She left the market, feeling like she had nowhere to go. Only thoughts of her children kept her from doing the unthinkable. Anna walked along the sidewalk, not noticing anyone around her. She didn't immediately notice the same Jeep. Even when it stopped next to her, she paid it no attention. "Anna," Jordan called out. "You look like a wreck." "Oh right, I heard. Please accept my condolences. Let me give you a ride," Jordan offered, extending his hand. Anna mechanically reached out her hand in response. They drove home in silence. Jordan occasionally glanced at her, lost in thought. Just before they reached the house, Anna saw her children, Jonah and Cristin, playing on the playground, waiting for their mother. A faint smile touched her lips. Her children were her only solace and strength. "You have lovely kids," Jordan remarked. "The little girl is adorable." and it didn't respond, and she was about to get out of the car when Jordan stopped her. "We need to talk," he said. "I have nothing," she replied hopelessly, "and I won't come to you. What do you want from me?" "You're not needed by me right now," Jordan smirked. "Have you seen yourself in the mirror lately?" "Get lost," Anna replied wearily, reaching for the door handle. "Feisty," Jordan sneered, his eyes flashing maliciously. Well, your husband wanted to be brave too, but it didn't work out for him." Upon hearing that sentence, Anna suddenly had the thought that Jordan was responsible for Martin's death. "Did you kill him?" she whispered, horror in her eyes, staring at Jordan. "Why?" "Well, my guys got a little carried away. Your husband is to blame himself for that." "Why did he come to me?" "Defending your honor," Jordan replied casually. "Are you admitting right now, just like that you're responsible for Martin's death?" "I'll go to the police," Anna threatened. "Go ahead. Who will believe you?" "Don't overreact, Anna. I initiated this conversation for a reason," Jordan said, as Anna looked at this monster, unable to find the right words. Fear gripped her entire body. "You have a good daughter," Jordan remarked, watching the children play. "Don't touch my children. Kill me, but don't touch my daughter," Anna pleaded. "Oh, how rude," Jordan sneered. "Nobody is going to kill anyone, but there's one condition." "What do you want?" Annie asked with pain in her voice. "You'll give me your daughter," Jordan said, and Anna stared at him as if he'd crossed all boundaries. "She's only 7 years old," she finally managed to say. "Are you out of your mind? Don't you dare touch my daughter." "What are you thinking?" Jordan smirked. "It's not what you imagine. You see, I have a wife. She's beautiful, well kept. But the problem is, she can't have children. At first, we thought about adopting a baby, but it's too much trouble with all the paperwork. Recently, we thought, why not take an older child? I didn't want one from an orphanage. They're all messed up, children of alcoholics and such. But your little girl is perfect for us." "What are you saying?" Anna responded with sarcasm, recovering somewhat from her shock. "Is she like a doll for you to buy in a store? She's a living person, and she's my child. She was yours. Now she'll be mine," Jordan asserted. "Think about it. What will you give her? She won't get into any school in this town, that's for sure. I've already taken care of that. You'll starve to death, and you'll drag your other children down with you." At first, I actually considered taking the boy. I invested so much money in him, but my wife convinced me otherwise. She said, "Why would we want a defective one? Really, who knows, maybe he'll have health issues too. But your daughter, she's a good fit for us. I can see she'll be a beauty." "Never. Do you hear me? You'll never get my daughter." Anna screamed and jumped out of the car. "Well, you're just a fool," came the response from the car. "I wanted to make a reasonable arrangement." The Jeep lurched forward and sped away. Anna rushed to the playground, grabbed her children, held them close, and began to cry. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Cristin asked, surprised. "Why are you crying? Are you upset that we came to the playground by ourselves? But I'm getting big now. I'll be going to school soon. I can watch over Jonah. You're my little helper." Anna sobbed. "Don't pay attention. I just have a headache." "Let's go home, Mommy," Jonah suggested. "We'll make you some tea." "Let's go, my dear ones." Back home, after putting the children to bed, Anna made a resolute decision. She needed to go to the police. After all, Jordan had practically confessed. That criminal had to be punished, and his true nature had to be revealed to everyone. Justice demanded it. She'd figure things out with John, but with Jordan, her only hope was for justice. Only after that could Anna hope for a job and a peaceful life. Considering her children, Cristin would start school in 3 weeks, and they couldn't even afford tights. She would prove to everyone that he was a criminal, and the school principal would realize her mistake. That would get Anna her job back, but that wasn't the main concern. Right now, it was essential to make her husband pay. The next morning, she was already at the police station. The investigator who had been handling her husband's case listened attentively, and then asked her to wait a moment. He returned from his office with Jordan. "Now, Anna, please repeat everything you just told me," the investigator said. "Let our esteemed friend here hear the absurdities they've concocted about him." "Esteemed friend," Annie exclaimed. "Are you out of your mind? He's a criminal." "She's not mentally stable," Jordan said with a condescending smile. "She even mentioned her own daughter, claiming I want to take her away." Can you believe it? Yesterday she saw me in a car on the street and practically threw herself under the wheels. I had to set her straight. She even started offering to sell me her daughter. Selling a child. The investigator frowned. I told you she's not mentally well, but don't judge her too harshly. She's probably lost her mind from grief, Jordan replied. Anna tried to say something in her defense, but no one was listening to her. Jordan and the investigator were already discussing what to do, whether to call an ambulance for Anna or initiate legal proceedings. Anna realized that she had to run. She dashed out of the office, with the investigator shouting after her, and Jordan trying to stop him, saying, "What can you expect from a distraught woman?" Anna couldn't recall how she ended up on the street. She leaped onto a passing bus and rode it home. In her apartment, she embraced her son and daughter and lay in silence. There were no tears, just a subtle tremor coursing through her body. What had happened to this world? Black had turned into white, and white into black. The truth seemed elusive. By evening, she had calmed down a bit and suggested taking the kids to the park. They eagerly agreed. Cristin and Jonah walked ahead, singing their little song about the mischievous little brother. Anna followed slightly behind, involuntarily smiling as she listened to her children. Thank goodness her little ones had recovered so quickly after Martin's death. Occasionally, she still heard Cristin sobbing at night and Jonah whimpering, but those painful memories visited them less and less. Children's minds were flexible, quick to forget all the bad things, and she needed to learn to forget and think about how to move forward. Anna walked along the path and became increasingly convinced that she had found a solution. Exactly. She would sell the apartment, settle things with John, and leave. It was better to live in seclusion than in a place where she had to expect Jordan's daily malevolence. But would he really live happily ever after, escape punishment? Anna decided that time would sort everything out. Jordan would still be held accountable for all his misdeeds. Unexpectedly, by the path near the road leading to the park, a tinted minibus pulled up. Two masked individuals jumped out and headed for Anna's children. She froze for a second and then screamed as she rushed towards them. One of them skillfully tossed Cristin into the vehicle and jumped in after her, while the other followed suit. Anna caught up with the abductor. She grabbed him by the sleeve. "Get lost." He growled and pushed her away with all his might. Anna fell to the ground. Terrified, Jonah stood on the path, shifting his gaze between his mom and the car. And then, the criminal grabbed the boy. No, Anna didn't cry, beg, or crawl on her knees. She pounced on the assailant like an enraged tigress, sinking her teeth into his hand. He screamed, recoiled, and loosened his grip. Jonah immediately flew to the side, and the criminal waved his injured hand. Finally, with a strong blow to the head, he managed to incapacitate her. Anna fell once again, and the criminal jumped into the car, speeding away. "My daughter, my girl," Anna cried, trying to get up, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Next to her, Jonah was in hysterics. Anna grabbed him, holding him close. Her boy couldn't be this upset. It could harm his recently operated heart. "Jonah, don't cry. It's just a game. Cristin will be back soon," she mumbled, the first thing that came to her mind. She glanced around in hope. Perhaps someone had seen what happened, but the park was empty. People had been strolling here before the incident. But when the turmoil began, they all dispersed, taking their children, toys, and bucks with them. Once again, Anna was left alone with her misery. She struggled to her feet, firmly took Jonah's hand, and headed to the police station, thankful that a bus had arrived immediately. "You again." The familiar investigator saw her at the entrance. "What nonsense have you come up with now?" "They took my daughter," Anna said slowly and clearly. "I'm sure Jordan Ross did this. You may not believe me, but he's a dangerous man. His people just tried to harm my son. Have you completely lost your mind?" The investigator smirked and turned to the duty officer. "Call the medics. They took my daughter." Anna raised her voice. "Can't you hear me?" "I hear you," the irritated investigator replied. "The medics will arrive soon, and we'll sort this out. Sit here, and I'll make a call." And he approached the office phone. Anna understood that he was calling Jordan. She looked desperately at the duty officer. The young man stared intently at the woman, and then she saw him whispering something to her and pointing at the door. "Run." She understood. Anna sidestepped while the investigator was engrossed in his conversation, exited the office holding her son's hand, and then she ran, carrying Jonah in her arms. Yes, it was difficult. She stumbled, but she knew that this was still faster. Public transportation was out of the question now. They could be caught. However, going back to the apartment was also not an option, but she had nowhere else to go. She locked the door securely, sternly instructed Jonah to stay in his room, like a mouse, and frantically tried to figure out where to search for her daughter. The phone rang. Anna was about to rush to it but stopped herself. She would give herself away. Perhaps it was the police looking for her. They might realize she was home, come with a team, and take her away. What about Jonah? What would happen to him? She sat back against the wall. The doorbell rang again. She didn't even flinch. Anna, open up. It's John. I'm alone. She heard a male voice. She sighed heavily. Was he here to settle scores now? Had they all decided to finish her off? Maybe it was the right thing to do. She couldn't bear it any longer. She opened the door. It was indeed John, and he was alone. He glanced at the stairs, then pushed Anna into the apartment, followed her, and closed the door. Get ready, he said quietly, and take your son. You both need to run. Run? What are you talking about? Where? Why? Anna looked at the man in confusion. Jordan's people will be here soon. He's very angry with you. He'll get rid of both you and the boy. And Cristin? Where's Cristin? Anna asked with tears in her eyes. It seems she's with him, but I didn't tell you anything. You have to figure it out yourself. I won't compete with Jordan. It's not safe. Then why did you come? Out of shame for what happened to Martin. He was a good man, righteous. I want to help you somehow, but forgive me, not without my own interest. You have to sign over this apartment to me now. Oh, I see. Anna bitterly smiled. And I almost believed in your sincerity. I am sincere. I'm helping you to disappear with your son from this city. But understand, I need this apartment. It's worth money. How will you help us? I'll take you to my country house now. Tomorrow, they'll arrange the documents for you, and I'll put you on a train to get you out of here. Anywhere but here. But my daughter. What about my Cristin? I can't live without her. Anna cried. At least save your son. With some persuasion, John convinced Anna. She hastily gathered their belongings, picked up the frightened Jonah, and obediently followed her savior, who was also pursuing his own interests. But sometimes you had to choose between two evils, as they say. John didn't deceive her. He sheltered the distressed woman at his country house, then arranged the necessary documents for her and her son. He handed them train tickets with a destination at a small station in Lincoln County. It was far, but they were less likely to be found there. At the train station, Annie asked for John's phone number. Why? He wondered. Forget about everything. I won't be able to. What if we find out something about Cristin? If we find out, I'll find a way to inform you. Get out of here and take care of your son. He's a lot like Martin. John literally pushed Anna and Jonah into the train car, and the train departed. Where were they going? Why was Anna running away? She could barely understand it herself. But at that moment, there was no other choice. They could either have imprisoned her or confined her to a hospital, accusing her of her daughter's disappearance. They were on the road for about 2 days. Throughout the journey, Anna frequently wiped away her tears. Jonah cried often too. The boy was scared and confused. He couldn't understand what had happened. Why had they left their apartment? What had happened to Cristin? In the morning, Anna and Jonah finally arrived at the station. It was a small station, with low houses nearby. Where should they go? Anna stood there bewildered, and then she heard the ringing of church bells, and her heart seemed to leap. Mom, where are we going? Jonah timidly asked. Let's go, Jonah, I think I know. Anna confidently replied. That morning, there were few people in the church. After the service, the young priest, Jean, headed to his office. Suddenly, he noticed a young woman with a little boy. They entered the church timidly, looking around. The woman set the boy on a bench against the wall and, after buying a candle from the shop, walked toward the icon. Something about their appearance troubled the young priest. Jean quietly approached the woman and heard her words addressed to the icon. Anna was weeping bitterly, and the priest stood behind her, sincerely sympathizing with this unfortunate woman. Her distress was evident to anyone. Anna turned around and let out a soft cry when she saw the priest. I apologize if I startled you, Jean said calmly. Do not be upset that I overheard your words spoken to the icon. Perhaps I can be of assistance. Unlikely, Anna mumbled. Although, maybe you could tell me who rents rooms in your town. My son and I are from afar. We have no one here, and I don't know where to go. That's why I ended up at the church. That's the right thing to do when your soul is troubled. Turn your thoughts to God. Jean nodded. Are you speaking of the road? You must be tired. Come to my office, and I'll make you some tea. Office? Anna was surprised. Yes, of course, Jean replied. We have our own organization here, and there's plenty of paperwork to be done. Did you think the priest only stands at the altar during service? To be honest, yes, Annie admitted. Oh, no, there's plenty to do here. They entered a small room, which served as Jean's office. The priest brought 2 glasses of hot herbal tea and some cakes. All of Anna's thoughts were consumed by her daughter, whom she had so easily let go. She had run away. Why? She was scared of the gangster. She believed that the police were after him. Perhaps she ran to save her son. And now, the realization hit her that she had lost Cristin. I can see that you carry a great sorrow in your heart, he finally said. If you wish, you can talk about it. I can't, Father, Anna replied, lowering her eyes and barely holding back tears. Know that if you ever want to talk, I'm always here, Jean said after some thought. You asked me about accommodation. I can help you with that. One of our parishioners mentioned recently that she would be willing to let a decent woman move in. I believe you would be a good fit for her. How much would that cost? Anna asked. It's free, Jean replied. Her main concern is having someone to help around the house. She's getting on in years. Anna agreed. After leaving the church, she accompanied Father Jean to the home of the elderly woman. Grandma Joanna warmly welcomed her guests, and upon learning the purpose of their visit, she clapped her hands in delight. She hadn't dared to hope that someone would come. But you don't know me at all, Anna asked her. What if you don't like me, and I have a child with me? Oh, I already like you. Grandma Joanna smiled. And having your son with you is even better. I love it when there's children's laughter in the house. My own grandchildren live far away. And so, Anna stayed with Grandma Joanna. She helped with the household chores and looked after Jonah, but her heart was heavy. Her thoughts were consumed by Cristin, and she couldn't stop worrying about what came next, how she would earn a living. After all, she was living under false documents now, and she couldn't find a job in her field with them. Luckily, John had given them some money to get by for the time being. That's what they were living on now. Anna sometimes wondered if she had made the wrong choice by listening to John back then. Maybe she should have fought for Cristin to the end. Who would have arrested her or taken her to the hospital? She was innocent. And they could have found evidence against Jordan. At some point, Anna decided to talk to Father Jean. He often visited Grandma Joanna to check on the lodgers. That evening, while Anna was working in the garden, she heard the gate creak. Father Jean entered the yard. They greeted each other, chatted briefly about unrelated matters, and then Anna gathered her courage. I need your advice, Father, she said. Well, it seems like the time for a conversation has come. The priest nodded. Let's sit down. They went deeper into the garden, where there was an old bench. They sat down. Grandma Joanna was busy in the kitchen, and Jonah was by her side. The boy was singing a song, the same one he had learned with Cristin. Grandma Joanna was listening and even joining in. Their harmonious duet could be heard through the open window. They'd become good friends. Grandma Joanna and Jonah, Jean smiled. Yes, Grandma Joanna is like a real grandmother to my son. Anna nodded. She paused for a moment and then, with a sob and tears streaming down her face, she said, But I still have a daughter, and I abandoned her. She ran away. Anna struggled, her voice trembling, as she recounted everything to Jean. She told him about Jonah's illness, her husband's death, the debts, Jordan's threats, his offer to take her daughter. And then she described the most horrifying event when they took her daughter away, how she almost lost her son, and how she had to trust a stranger because the police she had hoped for were in league with Jordan. I did everything wrong, Anna summed up. It's like I was under a spell, but now I realize that I betrayed my daughter. How is she, my little one? Don't blame yourself for anything, Jean reassured her. If you did what you did, there must have been reasons for it. I'm telling you this because I need your advice. How can I find Cristin? I need to go back to our hometown, but I'm afraid. What if something happens to me, and I still have Jonah? Can I go to the police here? I think you can, especially since I have acquaintances there who can help. But here's the thing. I understand that you came here with false documents. Why? John said that this way, the police wouldn't find me. Supposedly there were already leads on me in town. They said I was unstable, capable of aggression, suspected of harming my daughter, but it's not true. John himself said that Jordan took Cristin, as he promised. Yes, you were manipulated. Gene shook his head. But we'll deal with that. As for those documents, burn them. Do you have the genuine ones with you? Yes. Then live by them. But what if I get caught? I don't think anyone will catch you. It seems they deceived you, took advantage of your naivety. The next day, Anna and Gene went to the police. The investigator listened to Anna and promised to help. Rob, just not officially. Please find out, Gene requested. Of course, Gene. The investigator nodded. Anna and Gene left the station. For some reason, after talking to Rob, Anna's spirits lifted, and she felt confident that things would work out. He's a good investigator. She sighed and looked questioningly at the priest. Are you acquainted with him for a long time? We were together in Tajikistan. Gene replied evasively. Did you live together? We lived and served together. I used to be a paratrooper. I couldn't imagine life without the army. But then I got wounded. It was a shock for me. I even started drinking at one point. After they discharged me, my fiancé left me, too. Things were tough. Then an old man I met once. He worked as a caretaker at the church, led me to the church. That's where I found a new purpose in life. I went to seminary, and then they sent me to this village. The parish here is small, but the people are friendly. Father, you talk about a new purpose. What is it? All our troubles come from the fact that there's a lot of evil around us, and we accumulate this evil in our hearts. Irritation, dissatisfaction, grudges. We need to let it all go. Forgive, and then our hearts will be open to goodness. You'll start doing good yourself, and it will come back to you. That's interesting. Anna replied thoughtfully. But can you really forget and forgive everything? It seems impossible. Believe me, it's possible, just not easy. In their conversation, they reached Joanna's house. Jonah was sitting on a bench, and upon seeing his mother and father Gene, he rushed to meet them. Mama, were you gone? Exclaimed the boy. I woke up, and you weren't there. Mama, Cristin appeared in my dream, as if she came to us. She appears in my dreams too, Anna admitted while hugging her son. I hope our dreams will come true soon. The priest bid them farewell and hurried back to the church for the service, while Anna and Jonah went into the house where Grandma Joanna had already prepared a stack of pancakes. Grandma Joanna, why do you trouble yourself like this? Anna gasped, seeing the pile of pancakes. I could have come and made breakfast myself. It's no trouble at all. It brings me joy. The old woman smiled. Anna, my life has found meaning in caring for others. I wake up every morning with purpose. Anna hugged the old woman. In this short time, they had become like family. Yes, everything in life would work out, without a doubt, and Cristin would certainly be found. Several days passed, and Anna was in anticipation. For some reason, she believed in Detective Rob, who was also Father Gene's friend. But on that evening, the detective arrived at Grandma Joanna's house himself, and from his expression, Anna knew she wouldn't hear good news. Anna, why did you withhold the fact that you voluntarily gave up your daughter? Rob asked without preamble. Gave up? Annie exclaimed. That's not true. I told you everything that happened. You did tell me, and I believed you like a fool. My superiors got involved. They said, "Po woman, they took her child, threatened another child." I requested records from your hometown, and what did I find out? It turns out you officially renounced custody of Cristin. I received all the documents. I never did such a thing. Anna whispered in horror. Rob, please believe me, I could never have written such a thing. Is this not your handwriting? Is this not your signature? Rob showed a copy of the statement where Anna had personally renounced Cristin, and her signature was on it. It's not me. Anna cried out. Rob, please, trust me, I could never have written something like that. I did everything within my power. I'm sorry. At least tell me where my daughter is now. Not in an orphanage, is she? Jordan really took her, right? I don't have any information. All I know is that her documents are being prepared for adoption. Rob said his goodbyes and left, cursing himself for getting involved in this case. He left, and Anna stood by the fence, staring into nothingness. Had she lost her daughter forever? Soon, Father Jean came to see her. He listened to the woman, thought for a moment, and then suddenly offered a solution. If this Jordan lives in the capital and holds a fairly high position in society, we should go to the capital. We might be able to find him, learn where he lives, and then find out if Cristin is with him. And then what? Anna looked at the priest with hope. And then we'll figure it out. He sighed. I'm going there anyway since I need to visit the hospital. You're sick. No, it's just a formality, but it has to be done in the capital. See how fortunate it is. Well, I'm coming with you. That's a bad idea. What if Jordan sees you? And what about Cristin? You won't recognize her. Do you have a photo of her? Anna immediately rushed into the house. In her purse, in a hidden pocket, she kept a photograph of the girl. It was one of the few valuables she managed to take when she fled. She gave the photo to the priest, and he left, promising to find out everything. After a couple of days, he departed for the capital, and eagerly awaited his return. 10 days later, Father Jean came back. Anna learned about it and rushed to the church. When she saw the priest, he seemed to let out a heavy sigh for some reason, and her heart froze. What? She asked with hope and fear. I can't bring you any good news. Father Jean shook his head. I'm sorry, Anna. Father Jean shared what he had learned about Jordan. It turned out that he withdrew his candidacy officially, but his criminal past came to light unofficially. To avoid a scandal, he was convinced not to participate. Moreover, he had conflicts with his business partners, so he left the country and appeared to be settling in another one. Jean managed to visit Jordan's house, and after speaking with the security guard, he learned that indeed, a few days ago, Jordan returned with a little girl. Jordan's wife, Madison, was pleased and said they now had a daughter. They all left for another country together. A girl. How was she feeling? Annie asked through tears. The security guard said she was sad and cried a lot. But Madison, Jordan's wife, treated her very well. Jean replied after a brief pause. I understand that this may not be much consolation for you, but Cristin is being treated well there. Cristin. Maybe it's a different girl. Anna's hope rose. No, Father Jean lowered his gaze. The security guard knew. Jordan left with her and his wife. Anna's legs gave way. Her last hope crumbled. She had believed until the last moment that they would return her daughter, that she could hug her and apologize for having to leave her like that. Anna cried out like a wounded wolf. Her cry brought out a frightened Grandma Joanna and Jonah from the house. Mommy, are you sick? The boy repeated, touching his mother's hand. But Anna saw and heard nothing in her grief. It finally dawned on her that she would never see her daughter again. By nightfall, Anna had a fever. The ambulance arrived. The doctor gave her an injection and said it seemed to be a nervous breakdown. Anna would only recover with calmness and positive emotions. But where could she find those emotions? In the following days, Grandma Joanna surrounded Anna with care and attention. Like a mother, she looked after her with warmth, and Jonah constantly clung to his mother. Anna hugged her son, understanding how much he needed her, that she had to be strong for him, but she had no strength left. Father Jean also checked in on Anna. They talked for a long time, and perhaps these conversations played their part. Anna came to terms with the loss of her daughter, just as she did with everything else that had happened to her. And then she looked at Father Jean with different eyes. Father Jean, a young man, well-mannered, reserved, and decent, made Anna feel his warmth and care as if it radiated from his very being. She eagerly awaited these meetings, these conversations, and Father Jean hurried to Grandma Joanna's house, and he even became friends with Jonah. He took the boy to the church, telling him many interesting stories. The boy was ready to listen to Father Jean for hours and accompany him everywhere. None of this went unnoticed by observant Grandma Joanna. One day, she started a conversation with Anna. Perhaps, Anna, you and Jonah will be moving away from me soon. She slyly squinted her eyes and asked, What, where? Anna was bewildered. Are we bothering you, Grandma Joanna? Please don't think that. I won't be a burden to you. Father Jean mentioned there's a place in the library. The director has already invited me for an interview the day after tomorrow. Oh dear, that's not it at all. Grandma Joanna waved her hand. You and Jonah bring joy to my life, but that's not the point. I can see that you like Jean, and he likes you. What are you talking about? Anna blushed. I haven't thought about anything like that. Oh, come on, you can't hide such things from me. I believe that when the soul is drawn to someone, you shouldn't push those feelings away. Anna looked thoughtfully at Grandma Joanna, and then sighed heavily. Grandma Joanna, he's a priest. What difference does that make? Grandma Joanna shrugged. He's a man first and foremost, and he doesn't look at you like one of his parishioners. He's fallen in love with you, I can tell. And the old lady was right. A year later, Anna married Jean. She had a new life now, and it turned out to be quite good. Anna left the library. She was baptized and became the mother of the church, leading Sunday school classes for the local kids. With Jean, they had perfect harmony, and Jonah was delighted. He had such an amazing dad. He still remembered his first dad. He had been a good one too, but the new one was a true hero. A former paratrooper, now a priest, Jean became a role model for the boy. 5 years passed. During this time, Anna gave birth to 2 more children, a son and a daughter. She loved her children with all her heart. Jean was a good, loving, and caring father. Jonah, as the eldest, never felt neglected and adored his younger brother and sister. Anna often watched him play with the little ones and couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow, and one thought lingered in her mind. Somewhere out there is her eldest daughter, the first one. Yes, she had come to terms with the loss, but she couldn't forget. And his eldest son was glad that his mother no longer cried. She smiled now, and their new dad was wonderful. However, memories of the past were deeply imprinted in the boy's mind. He remembered his little sister Cristin. He remembered his dad Martin. He remembered how his mother had cried in the park that day, and then they had gone somewhere. This period in the boy's life had left a lasting impact on his consciousness. It had been scary, but then Father Jean had appeared, and everything started getting better. When Jonah was 12 years old, Father Jean first talked to him about his future profession. "I'll be like you, a priest," the boy replied without hesitation. Jean just smiled at this and shook his head, then said, "Don't rush, son, with your choice. The path to the church is different for everyone. You have another path ahead of you. You need to walk it to understand where your soul truly belongs. Right now, you just want to copy me. You shouldn't. But I like being in the church, helping you, and I like the scent of wax." Jonah argued. "That's not enough. Think it over. You have time. I've decided to start a military patriotic club at the Sunday school. I've wanted to do it for a long time, but I never had the time. There was always too much paperwork involved. But now it looks like everything's settled. I'll be recruiting kids soon." "What will they do, pray?" Jonah asked. "And that too." Jean smiled, then added seriously, "But the main thing is they'll learn to be real warriors, because a true Orthodox Christian is, first and foremost, a warrior, a defender of their homeland." "Do you think I can do it?" Jonah asked hesitantly, pondering. "Why don't you give it a try?" Soon, as Father Jean had mentioned, a military patriotic club for Orthodox youth was established at the church. He personally worked with the kids. In addition to religious studies, Father Jean taught the children history, hand-to-hand combat, basic medical aid, and much more. His main goal was to raise these young boys as patriots, true men. The Military Patriotic Club collaborated closely with many organizations, including the Cadet Corps. The club members often participated in various competitions, training sessions, and interacted with the cadets. Jonah, who had been with the club since its inception, eventually came to a realization: he wanted to be in the military. When he shared this decision with his parents, Jean approved of his son's choice, but Anna became concerned. "In all times, the lives of soldiers have been anything but calm," she said. "But I don't want a calm life," the matured son declared. "I want a real one, my own." His mother didn't object. She only crossed herself. So, at the age of 16, Jonah left the home where he had spent his childhood since the age of 7. The young man hugged his little brother and sister, Ethan and Ashley. They cried and worried about the impending separation, but also felt proud that their brother was going into the military. Jean was proud of his son's choice as well, and Anna had mixed feelings. She was anxious about letting her not-so-little boy go, especially after the loss of their eldest daughter still weighed heavily on her. What if something happened to her son too? However, she couldn't oppose her adult son's decision. There was hope that his previous illness would be of help in this case. But no, Jonah had fully recovered from his condition at an early age, and he was considered perfectly healthy. The young man enrolled in a military institute. Jonah was going to follow in the footsteps of his second father, a paratrooper. He was slightly nervous during his medical examination, but they found him fit for service. However, there was one catch. He could pursue a military career, but he wasn't allowed to become a professional paratrooper. Nevertheless, Jonah managed to enroll in the military institute. He understood that his dream would never be fully realized, but he was determined to serve his country, even if it meant working at headquarters. Jonah studied diligently and met all the requirements. If it weren't for one entry in his medical history, things might have been different. But as fate would have it, everything unfolded as it did. Once a year, he would return home, where his mother, father, little sister, and brother eagerly awaited him. For Jonah, these reunions were highly anticipated as well. One day, during one of his visits, he had a conversation with Anna that stirred up painful memories in her. "Mom, I remember her," Jonah said. "Remember who?" Annie asked. "Cristin, my older sister. I'd never forget Cristin for a second," Anne admitted, sighing heavily. "I wonder how she's doing now, how her life turned out. She's probably in another country." Jonah pondered this. He knew the whole story. It was indeed a complicated situation. Cristin probably had a different last name now, and she might have completely forgotten her previous life. But what if there were television programs about finding relatives now? "I'm afraid, son, that if the whole truth comes out, it will be difficult for Cristin. She probably thinks of that gangster as her father." Anna shook her head. Jonah had to agree with his mother, but thoughts of his older sister continued to haunt him. Time went by. On his 5th year at the institute, Jonah met a wonderful girl named Deirdre. She was about to graduate from medical school. The two quickly developed a relationship. A month before receiving his diploma, Jonah proposed to Deirdre. They had a wedding shortly after. Their honeymoon was short-lived, though, as Jonah had to leave on a business trip a week later. When he returned 3 months later, Deirdre had some exciting news for him. They were going to become parents soon. 1 month before their daughter's birth, Jonah was transferred to the very town where he was born. Jonah felt somewhat disoriented. It was remarkable to find himself in a place where he had spent the first years of his life. It felt like there were still some images from the past, but everything seemed unfamiliar and strange. Jonah even found the house where they used to live. There was an elderly couple living in their old apartment. Jonah didn't inquire how they got the place, although it stung a bit since, essentially, it had been taken away from his mother. But he decided not to dwell on the past. The young couple was assigned a service apartment. Soon, their daughter was born. Jonah suggested naming her Cristin, and Deirdre agreed. Several more years passed. Jonah served in the military unit, often going on extended business trips. Deirdre had grown accustomed to this routine. When Cristin turned 3 years old, Deirdre went back to work, joining the same military unit where her husband served. They enrolled their daughter in daycare, and everything fell into a routine. Deirdre and Cristin didn't miss Jonah too much during his deployments. On weekends and holidays, Deirdre would visit her parents since they lived nearby. Occasionally, Ethan and Ashley would also come to visit. The older kids were attending universities by now. However, Anna and Jean had only visited once. It was a distant and painful place for Anna to be, considering the amount of sorrow she had experienced there. But when Cristin turned 5 years old, all the family members were able to come for her birthday celebration. Jonah happened to be there at the time. On the morning of the birthday party, Cristin was taken to daycare, with the decision that the birthday girl shouldn't see all the preparations. Deirdre, along with her mother and Anna, prepared the festive table. Ashley, Ethan, and Jean decorated the apartment. Jonah was at the military base. In the evening, he got permission to leave early, as his wife had asked him to pick up Cristin from daycare. Cristin emerged from her group with a joyful expression, clutching some pieces of paper. "They congratulated me, Daddy," she exclaimed, extending the drawings to her father. They were drawings by the little kids, each depicting something related to the celebration. Some drew cakes, others balloons, and a few even attempted to portray Cristin herself. Jonah smiled as he examined the drawings and didn't initially notice the little boy who came out of the group right behind Cristin. The boy approached the girl and gave her a hug. "Cristin, are you going to have a cake today?" he asked. "Yes," she replied cheerfully. "A huge one. Mommy said so." "And presents?" "Yep, presents too." Daddy promised to give me a bear, just like this. Cristin raised her hands and hopped. No, there's no such thing. The boy shook his head. What, Jonah, tell him. Cristin pouted and turned to her father. Daddy, tell him. Yeah, there is. Jonah said, tearing himself away from the drawings. Cristin, enough of showing off. Let's get ready to go home. Cristin ran up to her father, and they began gathering her things from her cubby. The little boy stood there watching them. Well, if you were my sister, you'd invite me to your party, he suddenly said to her, not waiting for a response. I'd sing you a song. Do you want to hear one? And without further ado, he began to sing. I'm ready to jump into the ocean with a leap. I'm ready to climb a volcano without fear. I'm not afraid of any beast. But I'm scared of being a little brother, and it's time to say it openly, what being a younger brother is like. It's worse than a cannonball. That's a girl's song, Cristin replied over his shoulder and then turned to stick her tongue out at him. And Jonah, upon hearing the song, froze in his tracks. He had known these words since childhood, and it was his older sister who used to sing this very song to him. How did this boy know it? The song wasn't particularly well known. Jonah approached the child, crouched down in front of him, and looked into his eyes. Kid, where did you hear this song? He asked. My mom used to sing it to me, the boy replied softly, lowering his gaze. It seemed like he might start crying. Mom, where is she? My mom is in the hospital. Little one, what's her name? Jonah asked with a chill in his voice. Cristin. And I'm Jonah. A suspicion pierced Jonah's mind. Could this be the child of his older sister? The woman was named Cristin, and she had named her son after her brother, and he had named his daughter after his sister. But no, it seemed unbelievable. How could Cristin, his sister, end up here? It was well known that she had been taken to another country when she was 7. The daycare teacher came out of the group and, upon seeing the boy, shook her head. Jonah Ross, did you run off again? She scolded. I told you to play with your toy cars in the corner. Come on, don't disturb Cristin while she's getting ready to go home. Well, I thought they were going to pick me up too, the child replied quietly. Jonah, your grandmother will come later, you know that. The teacher sighed, taking the boy's hand. As the adult Jonah continued standing there, absorbing the information he had just heard, the daycare teacher led the child back into the group. Jonah, after reprimanding his daughter to put on her tights, followed them. He called the teacher over and asked directly, where is this boy's mother? Cristin is in the hospital right now, the woman answered, looking sadly at the little Jonah who had already occupied himself with his toy cars. A week ago, she was hit by a car. The driver fled the scene without calling for help. Cristin is in the hospital, and it's uncertain whether she'll recover. She's in a coma. Oh my God, what a tragedy, Jonah uttered, turning pale. His heart was pounding harder and harder. He was convinced that he had met his nephew and was on the verge of finding his older sister. You mentioned that the boy's grandmother would come. When? She usually comes around closing time, the teacher said, narrowing her eyes suspiciously at Jonah. Is she employed? No, I'm sorry, but what's with all these questions? The woman gave Jonah an appraising look. You see, many years ago, my older sister disappeared, and I think this Cristin might be her. Plus, I have a feeling that little Jonah and I look alike. The woman looked at Jonah with surprise, then at the little Jonah. Indeed, both blonde and curly-haired. There's definitely a resemblance, but it's also strange. If you want, you can talk to Jonah's grandmother, but you'll have to wait, she thoughtfully replied. We'll wait. Jonah nodded in response. Of course, Cristin wanted to go home to her birthday celebration, but Jonah convinced her that he had some serious business here, almost like a military mission. The girl knew that when her dad had a military assignment, it was something significant. So, with a heavy sigh, she obediently sat on a bench to wait. Parents came and went with their children. Soon, everyone was gone, except for Jonah's son. He had initially been in the play area, had tried a few times to go to the reception area, but the daycare teacher didn't let him. Then she gestured for him to talk to Cristin and her dad, while she worked on planning tomorrow's activities. It was already early in the evening when the door to the daycare opened, and a disheveled, not quite old, but rough-looking woman walked in. Jonah, get ready, she yelled from the doorway. Why aren't you dressed yet? The boy flinched at the sound of her voice, then obediently went to his cubby. Excuse me, Jonah stepped forward to meet the woman. "I need to talk to you. I just don't know where to start." "Start with the main thing." The woman smirked, and Jonah could smell the strong odor of alcohol on her breath. Overcoming his disgust, Jonah finally asked, "Are you Jonah's biological grandmother?" "Why do you care?" the woman replied, a bit hesitantly. "What do you want?" "I just want to know if you're his real grandmother, or if he's the son of your adopted daughter," Jonah firmly stated. "And this is not idle curiosity. I have every reason to believe that my nephew is standing right in front of me." "You seem like someone who doesn't drink, but you're talking nonsense," the woman mumbled, then rushed to help the poorly dressed Jonah put on his clothes. She didn't say another word and, within a minute, stormed out of the daycare, dragging Jonah, who was now dressed, with her. Jonah, the elder, decided to track down where this woman lived. He and his daughter got into the car and slowly followed them. Soon, the woman and the boy disappeared into one of the old 5-story buildings. Well, Jonah had an approximate address now, and he could find the exact apartment later. That was his plan. But for now, it was time to take his daughter to the birthday celebration. They had been eagerly awaited. However, this did not spoil the party at all. There was a huge cake, lots of presents, including that giant teddy bear, and plenty of well wishes for the little birthday girl. Cristin was ecstatic, and all the relatives were overjoyed. Jonah participated in the festivities too, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Could it be that he had found his sister? After the festivities had ended, and all the numerous guests had dispersed to various corners of the apartment to sleep, Deirdre quietly asked her husband, "Jonah, why are you so distant?" "What do you mean?" he asked, lost in thought. "You seem distant. It's our daughter's birthday. All the family is gathered here, and you've been lost in your own world all evening. Is it another deployment?" Deirdre looked at her husband with concern. Jonah shook his head and briefly recounted the story from the daycare. Deirdre listened and agreed with her husband. "It's all very strange. Just don't say anything to his mom for now. She'll worry," she advised. "And maybe you're wrong, despite all the coincidences." The next day, Jonah kept an eye on the clock, and as soon as his duty ended, he rushed to the small 5-story apartment building. Outside the building, as was customary, there were elderly women who seemed to know everything about everyone. Jonah immediately identified them by their sharp, judgmental gazes. "Excuse me, ladies," Jonah addressed them with a charming smile. "Do you know everyone in this building?" "Suppose we do," one of them replied, pursing her lips. "In the second entrance of this building, there is a woman around 60 years old. She has a grandson named Jonah." Jonah said, "She lives there, so what?" replied the second woman, glaring at Jonah. "Well, nothing much. I think I know her. She used to be an acquaintance of my mother. I believe she's facing some problems now, and I'd like to help." Jonah lied. "So, go talk to her." The first woman chuckled. "Why would we be involved?" "Well, you see, she's acting as if she doesn't know me. Probably embarrassed about something," Jonah explained. "Of course, she's embarrassed." The second woman snorted. "She's an alcoholic. Her daughter is in the hospital, and she keeps drinking. And where are the child protection services looking? They should take the boy away from her. Does she drink heavily? I just can't believe it's her. She used to be different." Jonah said, "Yeah, she used to be." The first woman sighed, hesitated for a moment, and then spilled the beans. Madison, that was the name of the woman Jonah was interested in, had moved to this city 10 years ago. Rumor had it that she used to live with a wealthy husband, who happened to be a gangster. He had fled to America to escape his criminal associates, but they eventually tracked him down after many years and killed him, seizing all of Madison's wealth in the process. She barely managed to escape, and that's when she arrived in the city. Here, she got involved with a local market owner named John. Some said they had known each other from before. They lived together for a while, but then John kicked her out, opting for someone younger and more attractive. Madison lived on, and when John passed away from a heart attack, she felt a deep sense of sadness. She had no source of income left, and she had a daughter. Surprisingly, the daughter was nothing like her mother. She was a decent, respectful, and well-educated young woman. Cristin graduated from a pedagogical university and worked as a teacher. However, she turned out to be too trusting. She fell for a charming guy who played with her feelings and then left, disappearing somewhere unknown. Cristin was left pregnant. Madison would berate her daughter every day, urging her to get rid of the child. But Cristin didn't listen and gave birth to a son. She took good care of the boy, that was for sure. The only problem was the lack of money in the family. When Jonah turned 1.5, Cristin sent him to daycare and went to work. She struggled to balance school and daycare, and Madison hardly helped her daughter. It was as if she was a stranger. To more, Cristin took on an additional job at a publishing house. That's how she managed to make ends meet. Recently, when she was returning home from work, she'd get hit by a car. What would happen next? Only God knew. Jonah listened to the elderly women who were now telling him the story enthusiastically, and he realized that the puzzle was coming together. He had undoubtedly found his sister. Is she home now? He asked the elderly ladies. Who? Madison. One of them replied. Where else would she be? She already picked up her grandson from daycare. Excuse me, ladies, thank you so much for such an informative story, Jonah said, extending a couple of chocolates he had in his pocket. He had actually bought them for his daughter. But what could he do? The old ladies had been helpful. Jean nodded gratefully and walked into the entrance of the building. A couple of minutes later, he stood at the worn-out door, hesitating to press the doorbell. However, it turned out that the doorbell wasn't working. Jonah knocked lightly at first, then more forcefully, and finally pounded on the door. Who's banging like that? A sharp, female voice shouted from inside. The door swung open, revealing a disheveled Madison. Who are you? She asked, not recognizing him. Your conscience, Jonah replied, and gently pushing the woman aside, entered the apartment. Hey, where are you going? Madison yelled. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, call them. They'll sort things out properly, and you'll have to answer for everything. For the missing girl, for the terrified mother, for the boy threatened by your husband's gang. Why do you look so pale? Does something ring a bell? Jonah confronted her. Who are you? Madison repeated, this time with fear in her voice. I'm that same boy, Jonah declared. Of course, he was taking a huge risk. He wasn't sure about everything, but Madison's reaction told him he was onto something. I'm not guilty of anything. Madison sniffled. It was all Jordan's idea back then. Tell me everything. They entered the room that had clearly not been cleaned for several weeks, probably since the time Cristin ended up in the hospital. Madison sat down on the couch, fiddling with the collar of her faded blouse, and began to tell her story. The ending of her story wasn't much different from what Jonah had already heard from the elderly women, but the beginning of this tale dated much earlier. It all began when Jordan gave money to Anna for her son's medical treatment. He was smitten by the young teacher and had already imagined how grateful she would be. However, she refused him, and that infuriated Jordan. No woman had the right to reject him. Madison knew that Jordan had a tendency to fixate on someone in a provincial town like this. It happened periodically, and she wasn't particularly concerned. As long as her husband continued providing for her, he might not love her, but he feared her father, a criminal authority. At that time, Madison had also received a devastating diagnosis: secondary infertility, a consequence of an unsuccessful abortion in her youth. Madison was shocked. She wanted a child, even considered adopting from an orphanage, but she was afraid of the hereditary traits of those children. That's when Jordan mentioned that he was soon going to have a daughter, a 7-year-old already. Madison was fine with it. No more crying, sleepless nights, just a ready-made princess, especially since the girl in the photo that Jordan showed her was adorable. And yes, she knew that the girl was the daughter of the very woman Jordan had been pursuing. So what? Madison even felt some satisfaction. No, she didn't feel jealous, but something was off this time. Jordan was way too nervous. To obtain the girl as quickly as possible and without causing a fuss, Jordan had orchestrated a whole scheme. First, he bribed local law enforcement. Then he made a deal with the traitor John. John owed Jordan a lot, so he agreed to play the part of the concerned party. He managed to convince Anna that running away was a matter of life and death since her son was already under attack. By the way, nobody was planning to harm Jonah at the time. It was all just a theatrical act. But Anna believed it. In gratitude for John's assistance, Anna immediately handed over her apartment to him, and John, having placed Anna and her child on a train, rushed to report to Jordan that the job was done. At the same time, a fake rejection letter from Anna regarding her daughter was already written. The Child Protection Services were also staffed with people eager for money. But Jordan was not stingy. Soon, Cristin officially became his and Madison's daughter. John sold Anna and Martin's apartment and was also pleased with the way things had turned out. Madison liked the girl, even though she cried constantly in the beginning. Not to worry, good psychologists and some medication did the trick. Cristin began to forget her previous family, and Madison was overjoyed. Then, they had to worry when Madison's husband died. Jordan was targeted, and compromising information about him came to light. He had to withdraw his candidacy, but even in that situation, Jordan managed to extricate himself. He gathered his wife and the newly adopted daughter and took them to another country. They lived there, and then they finally found her husband and killed him. They had to return. Joan already knew the next part of the story from the ever-present elderly ladies. "I'm not guilty of anything," Madison sobbed. "It was all Jordan's idea. I was sure your mother had agreed to everything." "Where's the boy?" he dryly asked Madison. "Which one?" She stared at him blankly. "Your grandson, Jonah." "Oh, he's in the room." Madison gestured towards the closed door. It turned out she had locked the little boy inside to keep him out of her way. Jonah took the key from her, unlocked the door, and stepped into the room. Little Jonah was sitting, huddled in a corner. "Hello." The adult Jonah tried to smile. "Do you recognize me?" "You're Cristin's dad," the boy said quietly. "That's right. And do you want me to tell you a secret? I'm your uncle." "Uncle mine? How's that?" The child's eyes suddenly lit up. "Your real uncle." "Uncle," the child sobbed, throwing his arms around Jonah's neck. "Take me away from here." Tears welled up in the eyes of the grown man. My God, how hard it must have been for this little one to live forever with a drunken old woman, receiving not a shred of warmth from her. "Uncle," the child said, sobbing. "Grandma says my mom will die, and she'll send me to an orphanage because I'm a mistake of nature. I don't understand. What does that mean? Am I different somehow? I don't believe my mom will die. Grandma says it on purpose to make me cry. When I cry, she laughs. You won't stay with your grandmother for another minute. We're going to see Cristin now." "Will I see Mom?" the boy asked, wiping away his tears. "Uncle, I've missed her so much." "You'll definitely see her," Jonah assured him firmly. "Are you taking him away?" "Well, go ahead. He's no use to me anyway," Madison remarked grimly. "You're not a woman," Jonah said. "You're a monster." When Jonah appeared in the doorway with the little boy, everyone stood there in amazement. However, Cristin was overjoyed to see her childhood friend. "Oh, Jonah, hi," she exclaimed. "Did you come to play with me?" "Yeah," the young Jonah replied timidly, glancing at the remnants of the festive table where a huge piece of cake sat in the center. "All right, first, let's feed our guest," the adult Jonah commanded. And when the children sat down at the table, he nodded to Jean and Anna, who understood without words and went out to the hallway with their son. "Mom, don't worry too much, but it seems I've almost found Cristin," Jonah said. "Cristin?" Anna was puzzled and looked into the room. Only then realizing the meaning of his words, she turned pale and gasped, "My Cristin?" "Yes, Mommy, your daughter. She's in the hospital now, and I'm going to visit her tomorrow." "I'm going too," Annie exclaimed. "But what's wrong with her? Are you sure it's her? How did you find her? And who is the little boy?" "And the little boy is your grandson, my nephew," Jonah explained. Jonah proceeded to tell Anna and Jean everything. They listened with bated breath, and Anna began to cry. She had been convinced that her daughter was happy, and now she was faced with such a difficult fate. "But she'll get better, won't she? She'll get better," she repeatedly asked her son hopefully. "With God's help, everything will be fine," Jean reassured her on Jonah's behalf. "Mom, go meet your grandson," she heard her son say. "Oh, yes." Anna snapped out of her reverie. In the meantime, Jean was already engaged in lively conversation with young Jonah. Jean had a special talent for connecting with children, and this time was no exception. Initially scared and reserved, the little boy was now chattering away. He and Cristin sat on their grandfather's lap, even tugging at his beard, while their father laughed heartily. Annie approached them and knelt in front of young Jonah. "Jonah, my grandson," she whispered. "You look so much like your uncle when he was a child." "Are you my grandma?" the boy asked. "Another one." "Are you a nice grandma?" "Well, Cristin seems to like me," Anna replied with a tearful smile. "Why are you crying?" I'm crying tears of joy." Deirdre's parents, Ashley and her, exchanged incredulous glances. Deirdre had already whispered everything to them, but it was still hard to believe that such miracles could happen. Soon, little Jonah had met the entire family. It turned out he had 2 uncles, 2 aunts, and even 2 grandfathers, one of whom was quite interesting, with a beard like Santa Claus. But Cristin had said he was not Santa Claus but their father. "How interesting, father," Jonah exclaimed. There were also 2 grandmothers, with Grandma Anna hugging and kissing him a lot, while Grandma Madison had never hugged him like that, let alone kissed him. Everything in the story would have been wonderful if the adult Cristin had been with them, but she still had to be found. From Madison, Jonah hadn't quite figured out which hospital she was in. However, using his connections, he managed to find out where she was. He headed there with Anna and Jean the next day. The doctor didn't want to let them in. It was the intensive care unit, and it was getting late. Only thanks to Jean's fatherly persuasion did he finally relent. "You're right," he mumbled. "Perhaps only prayers can help her now. We've done all we can." They entered the intensive care unit. Cristin lay there with her head bandaged, entangled in various wires and tubes. Seeing her, Anna's heart ached. She remembered how many years ago, Martin had lain in a similar condition. "Oh Lord, help my daughter," she silently prayed. "I've only just found her. Don't take her away." There was no doubt that this was her daughter, even with her head bandaged and her eyes closed. Cristin strongly resembled Anne's in her youth, and everyone noticed it. "My daughter, my dear," Anna whispered, kneeling before her daughter and kissing her hands. "I'm here. Mom is here. My girl. Hear me." Jonah stood nearby, gazing at his sister. For many years, he had imagined their reunion, but he never thought it would be like this. "Sis, my dear sister, I'm that very Jonah you used to sing songs with, play, and draw." "Cristin, we found you," his lips whispered. Father Jean stood silently, lost in thought. "Is she baptized?" Father Jean finally asked. "I don't know," Anna sobbed. "I never baptized her. I took the ritual with my son when I started communicating with you, Father. I don't think that Jordan, the gangster, cared about my daughter's soul, and his wife didn't either." "I agree," Jonah nodded. "All right, then we'll perform the sacrament today," Jean decisively stated. "In any case, it won't make things worse. Doctor, will you allow me to prepare everything here?" The doctor simply waved his hand, saying, "Let the priest at least try." The doctors had exhausted all their methods. Father Jean had gone somewhere, but soon returned with everything needed for the baptism ceremony. It was already late at night when Cristin was baptized. Afterward, Jean spent a long time praying at the bedside of the sick, and Anna joined in the prayers, while Jonah also whispered his prayers. They say that there are no atheists in foxholes and plummeting airplanes. Well, at the deathbed, everyone believes in miracles. In Jean's family, they knew that such miracles could happen. As dawn began to break, the doctor asked everyone to leave. The head of the department would be arriving soon, and he probably wouldn't appreciate such a gathering of people in the intensive care unit. "Can I stay?" Jonah asked. "I'll sit quietly here." "I should stay," and it objected. "No, Mom, you can barely stand," Jonah replied. "You and Father should go back home. I've already called a taxi." "What about you? You have to go to work." Jean frowned. "I took 2 days off. I forgot to tell you. You go, rest." "Mom, the important thing is that we found Cristin. Everything else is in the hands of the Lord." "You're right, my son," Jean replied. "Let's go to our grandson and granddaughter." They left, and Jonah remained by the patient's bed. Cristin was breathing steadily, and it seemed like at any moment she might open her eyes. But it didn't happen. Jonah didn't even notice when he laid his head on the back of the nearby chair, dozed off, one hand under his head, the other lightly holding his sister's hand. Jonah even dreamt of something when suddenly he felt like a butterfly had stirred in his palm. It cautiously touched the skin with its wings and then froze. Then it moved again. Jonah opened his eyes and almost shouted with joy. His sister's fingers were moving. First one, then another. Jonah stepped out of the room. "Doctor, her fingers are moving," he exclaimed, breathless. The doctor, who had been dozing on a cot, immediately jumped up. "It can't be," he said, heading into the room. "You must have imagined it. I didn't want to say it in front of her mother, but the patient's condition is practically hopeless. But her fingers are moving." The doctor approached the patient and leaned over her. "No, you must have dreamt it." He shook his head. And then, Cristin opened her eyes. Jonah nearly screamed with joy. The doctor froze in place, and then he asked, "Cristin, can you hear me?" "I can." A weak voice came, and it was a victory over death. Doctors hurried around, nurses bustled about, and they escorted Jonah out of the ward, promising to let him in as soon as the woman regained consciousness. He obediently went downstairs to the reception area and waited. He didn't want to call his mother right now, even though he wanted to. No, she should get some rest, his dear mother. She had been through so much. Jonah had to wait for a long time. He even managed to doze off. He woke up when someone shook his shoulder. It was the doctor from the intensive care unit. "How is she?" Jonah asked anxiously. "The patient has come out of her coma, and it's a genuine miracle," the doctor replied. "Can I see her?" "Not right now. She's still very weak. Strong emotions could undo all our efforts. Please be patient for a little while longer. We'll let you in a few days." Jonah went home, and there he shared the good news with his family. Cristin is going to make it. As promised by the doctor, a few days later, Jonah, Anna, and Jean were allowed into the ward. They brought Cristin's son with them. Little Jonah was so excited about the upcoming meeting, but when he saw his mother, all bandaged up, he froze in his tracks. "Mom, is that you?" he timidly asked. "Sweetie," Cristin replied softly, "it's me. Don't be afraid. Come closer." The little boy cautiously approached his mother and gently touched her hand. "Mom, I missed you so much," the boy said. "I'm so glad you woke up. It's all right now, my son. How have you been without me?" "I'm okay now. I found Grandma Anna and Uncle Jonah, and I have a little sister. Her name is Cristin too." "I don't understand," Cristin whispered. At that moment, Anna couldn't hold back any longer and approached the bed. "Cristin, my darling, it's me, your mother, your real mother." "Mom," Cristin whispered as well. "But how? I was told you had died." "My dearest, I'm alive, and so is Jonah. But let's not dwell on that now. We'll tell you everything later. For now, focus on getting better. We'll come to visit you, and don't worry, your son is with us now. No one will harm him." "Thank you," Cristin replied quietly. It felt like some sort of vision to her, a consequence of her injuries. It was hard to believe, especially after being on the brink between life and death. A little over a month passed as Cristin gradually regained her strength, and now she was absolutely certain. Those weren't just visions. Her family had indeed found her. Anna and Jonah visited her very often. Deirdre brought her son and her daughter. Ethan and Ashley also came to see her. They told Cristin about Jean, who had to return to his parish, but even from a distance, he was with the family, calling and praying for Cristin's recovery. Prayer. Everyone at the hospital whispered and recalled that very night. No doubt it was Father Jean who had helped back then. His prayers, the baptism ceremony. After all that, it was hard not to believe in a higher power. Cristin was discharged from the hospital after 3 months. The young woman was a bit bewildered about where to go next. She didn't want to go to Madison. There was just too much negativity associated with her. Besides, Cristin's former neighbors informed her that Madison had disappeared somewhere. Perhaps if Cristin hadn't known the whole truth, she might have rushed to find her birth mother, but not now. Madison was also guilty of their separation, and she had lied to her for many years. "My home is your home," her brother said, and his wife wholeheartedly agreed. Cristin didn't reveal much about herself at first, but over tea, she recounted the hardships she had endured. When they took her from the park, they had driven her somewhere far away and told her that she would have a new mother and father, and her previous mother had passed away, and there was no more brother. How Cristin cried then, but with time, she came to believe it, especially since a new life had begun. She had moved to a different country. Initially, it was exciting, and her past life faded away. And when Jordan died, Madison paid even less attention to her daughter. She often threatened to send her to an orphanage, but for some reason, she never did. Perhaps there was still something human in her. When Cristin grew older, she understood the chasm between her and her adoptive mother. Madison didn't care about Cristin's life. She was not accustomed to working, and Cristin knew she had to rely on herself. She worked and studied. She didn't want to leave the capital city when Madison conspired with John. After so many years, she still worried about her adoptive mother, so she went, and it was not in vain. Without her, Madison would have completely succumbed to alcoholism. With Cristin, she was at least held back a little. Later in Cristin's life, there was great love and great betrayal. But it all became less important when she gave birth to her son. What to name him? Jonah, in honor of her own brother, whom she had lost in her early childhood. And as for superstitions, Cristin didn't believe in them. Her memory still retained some events. She also remembered her mother. It was painful to realize that they were no longer in this world. Cristin didn't even try to find them. She had been convinced of their deaths. Yes, fragments of the past remained, and Cristin remembered that funny little song she used to sing with her brother. It was hard to tell who liked it more, her brother or her sister, and the song charmed her son. He listened from early childhood, smiling when his mother sang it, and eventually he started singing it himself. It was thanks to that song that I realized where to look for you, Cristin admitted to her brother. You have to forgive me for taking so long. We thought you were doing well. We didn't want to ruin your happiness. Happiness? Cristin smiled sadly. What happiness is there without you, my family? A bit more time passed, and soon Cristin, with little Jonah and Anna, moved to the village that had become home for their family. Cristin agreed that it would be better for her and her son there. And it truly was. She quickly found a job at the school, and Jonah started attending daycare. Within a year, Cristin met her love there. Ben also worked at the school. Father Jean officiated their wedding. The large and close-knit family grew even larger, particularly lively in the little house near the church during the summers when everyone had vacation time. Even Madison visited with her fiancé, and Deirdre gave birth to a son. Jonah was so proud. He was the heir, the next generation of their military legacy. With God's blessing, he would surely become a paratrooper, and Cristin was expecting another child. Ben was ready to carry her on his hands all the time. Cristin even scolded him, saying she wasn't sick, just pregnant. Their children, Cristin and Jonah, loved visiting their grandparents. Jean and Anna, looking at their family, just smiled. The house was getting a bit small. Maybe it was time to expand. But that was up to God. Yes, this family had endured many trials and managed to find each other. A miracle, perhaps, but that's how